Greatest football player the University of Alabama has ever produced. Is it Julio now? Has Julio become that guy? I only really gave you 2 options in that poll. And as a result, gotten some really, really good feedback in terms of tweet-in options. But as it sits right now, your 2 options were Derek Thomas, Julio Jones, and a tweet-in. And right now, it's still DT. DT with 54% of the vote with over 400 votes in. So 400 votes in on this Mercedes of tuscaloosa.com poll of the day. Greatest football player UA has produced. 2 choices and a tweet in. Derek Thomas, legendary. This guy made All-Pro 3 times, first team All-Pro, 3 times second team All-Pro. Look at the numbers he put up at Alabama. And we talk about the great years that guys like Ryan Anderson and Tim Williams have had, and they've been great, but not 27 sacks in a season. We haven't seen that, and I don't think we'll ever see that again in terms of what Derek Thomas was able to do on the football field. He did it not only here, he took it to another level in the National Football League.
And let's not forget when he was at Alabama, Travis, that he put up those 27 sacks in a season in the era of pre-Spurrier offenses.
Yeah, he did. He just absolutely dominated football games. But I'll tell you, Julio's making it interesting if he isn't already that guy. And again, I'm talking about just pure football players. In terms of accolades and accomplishments, you can put Bart Starr, and we've seen a couple people in this poll tweet in Bart Starr, and understandably so. The Super Bowl titles, the MVPs, hard to argue with any of that. But in terms of just all-around football players, and when I talk about that, I tend to think of guys and the terms of where else could they play on the football field and make an impact. You think Julio Jones wouldn't make a pretty good safety in the National Football League at 6'3", 220 pounds? Julio may be able to play corner at that size.
I think the Falcons even use him on like special prevent situations at the end
Hail
of the
Mary
game.
situations. Yep. Yeah, I would not have been surprised yesterday if it came down to another Aaron Rodgers Hail Mary for the Packers to see number 11 on the back end of that defense. If I was a Falcons fan, that's what I would wanted to have seen. In 2009, when Alabama edged Auburn down on the Plains in that memorable game, and Julio had the big series late with Greg McElroy and going down and getting in the end zone to win that game. You remember Auburn had a chance to come back down and throw it into the end zone. And I was surprised that Julio wasn't on the field for that play. Now, all's well that ends well, but Julio was on the field in 2009 for the block kick by Terrence Cody. So he did see time and roles such as that on special teams at Alabama. But in terms of just all-around football players, hard to go against Julio right now. And I'd love to get your thoughts on that at 205-342-9904. We've also heard or seen responses favoring Don Hudson. If you want to talk about the guy who started it all at Alabama, it's Don Hudson. I mean, we're talking about a guy who's in both the college and pro football halls of fame. So I can't really argue with you there. That's an excellent addition to the list. John Hanna, the great offensive lineman, has been mentioned. My recollection of Hanna has more to do with his time in the National Football League. A little bit before my time as a player, maybe, at Alabama. But how many times have you heard it in terms of greatest lineman to ever play the game? Not greatest Alabama lineman to play the game. Not greatest New England Patriots to ever play the game. Offensive lineman to play the game. Or even NFL line. Greatest, as in singular, offensive lineman to ever play the game in John Hanna. So there's some choices. And the tough thing with this, James, is that, as we always do, when topics like this come up, we go to our favorites, right? It's more about who we like. We can't be objective because my favorite Alabama football player of all time is David Palmer.
Not only who you like, but who you also remember.
Right. Who you were around for. David Palmer is my favorite Alabama football player of all time. He's the guy I enjoyed watching play football more than any other player that has ever played at Alabama that I've been able to see. So we have to sort of take that out, which is very, very hard because as we've talked about on this program for many, many times, it all goes back mostly to our formative years. Growing up watching Alabama football, I caught the 70s there, the end of the Bryant era. But for me, even some of my favorite Alabama players didn't play on the best Alabama teams. But just because they're my favorite doesn't really make them relevant to the discussion of greatest. David Smith might be one of my favorite Alabama football players of all time. You know why? Because he was short, slow, and left-handed, like this guy. So
kind of like Mike Shula.
We lived through certain guys too. Right. Absolutely. Van Tiffin was one of my favorite Alabama players because as a kid who grew up and was self-taught in terms of kicking the football, that's when it all happened for me, when Van Tiffin was rolling through the program and making huge kicks like the one in 1985. So it's tough for us to differentiate between favorite and greatness. We struggle with that, understandably so. And on Periscope, we just got a tweet in, or a write in, I guess you could call it, a Periscope in for Jay Barker. And look, probably another case of an individual who recollection of Alabama football really started with that early 90s run. And Jay Barker, a national championship quarterback, I believe the 1994 SEC Offensive Player of the Year, I want to say, under the great Homer Smith, late great Homer Smith as the offensive coordinator. So there you go. I don't have Jay as one of the greatest that Alabama's ever produced. But again, we have our favorites, and understandably so.